The boy in seat 14C had learned, over 4 years of surgeries, that people's eyes always found him first and looked away last. Marcus Elijah Webb, 17 years old, settled into his window seat on United Flight 303 with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have made peace with their bodies through sheer necessity. He was lean in the way that physical therapy makes you lean, not athletic, but deliberate, each motion chosen rather than automatic. The left side of his face carried the topography of what the surgeons at Shriners Hospital in Cincinnati called significant dermal reconstruction, a phrase that meant nothing and everything, that translated in plain language to a landscape of pale grafted skin running from just below his left ear, across the jaw, and down onto the left side of his neck, where it disappeared beneath the collar of his burgundy hoodie. His right side was untouched, a 16-year-old's face, still soft at the edges, a scattering of acne along the temple, eyebrow arched in a way that gave him a permanently questioning expression. The effect of looking at Marcus Webb was of encountering two truths simultaneously, the way a photograph taken mid-blink tells you more about a person than a posed portrait. He had the window seat. He always booked the window seat. United Flight 303 was scheduled to depart Cincinnati/Northern Kentucky International Airport CVG, Gate C-14, at 7:18 on a Tuesday morning in February, bound for Reagan National in Washington, D.C., where Marcus was due to testify before a Senate subcommittee on pediatric burn care funding at 2 p.m. The invitation had arrived 4 months ago in an envelope with a congressional seal, and his mother, Denise, had cried in the kitchen for 20 minutes before composing herself enough to call his caseworker. Marcus himself had read the letter twice, set it on the counter, and gone back to finishing his chemistry homework. He was that kind of kid. The aircraft was an Airbus A320, and it smelled the way all planes smell at this hour, recycled air threaded with the ghost of someone's gas station coffee, a faint petrochemical undertone that you stopped noticing after 30 seconds. The cabin was filling in the slow, shuffling way of early morning departures, when the passengers are too tired for the theater of it. A man in a gray suit 2 rows back was already unconscious against his window, a neck pillow inflated around him like a life ring. In 12A, a young woman in nursing scrubs, her lanyard read Sarah K., RN, was arranging a Ziploc bag of snacks with the focused intention of someone who had learned never to trust airline food. In the middle seat beside Marcus, 14B, sat a heavy-set man named Gerald who had introduced himself immediately and with the enthusiasm of someone who found every flight an opportunity, who was already describing his daughter's soccer tournament in Louisville with the unearned intimacy of the captive audience. Marcus listened, nodded, watched the tarmac through the oval window. It was 6:58 a.m. and the sky over Kentucky was that specific February gray that isn't quite threatening but refuses to comfort, the color of a decision not yet made. Ice crystals stippled the edges of the window. Ground crew in orange vests moved beneath the wing. He had in his lap a manila folder containing his prepared remarks, 8 pages, double-spaced, which he had written himself and revised 17 times. His left hand rested on top of it. The skin on the back of that hand was also reconstructed, the grafted tissue slightly shinier than the surrounding skin, the fingerprints not quite his own. He tended not to look at it in public. He was looking at it now because no one was watching. The flight attendant working the back galley, a woman named Trish, 50s, with reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead in the manner of someone who had seen everything and remained fond of people anyway, caught his eye as she passed and smiled with the specific warmth of someone who knows how to mean it. The lead flight attendant, a tall man named Darius who introduced himself over the PA with a voice like smooth gravel, ran through the safety demonstration with the practiced fluency of a man who could recite it backward. The captain's voice came on. "Captain Yolanda Marsh," she said, pronouncing her own name with quiet pride, and she announced a flight time of 1 hour and 54 minutes, cruising altitude 32,000 feet, some light chop over the Appalachians but nothing to worry about. Her voice had the particular calm of someone who had worried about much worse. Marcus uncapped his pen. He was going to read his remarks one more time. That was when the commotion began at the door. She was not the last passenger to board, but she moved as though she were the only one. Her name, as Marcus would later learn from the federal complaint, was Brenda Corinne Hutchins, 53 years old, of Kenwood, Ohio, a suburb of Cincinnati where the houses have 3-car garages and the HOA meetings last 2 hours. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a silk blouse in a shade that catalogs would call ivory and her dry cleaner would charge $11 to press. Her handbag was a Tory birch tote in cognac leather, monogrammed, large enough to pack for a weekend. Her carry-on was a Rimowa Classic in cabin silver, the kind of luggage that announces itself. Large-framed Chanel sunglasses were perched on her head despite the cabin having no sun. Her hair was expensively highlighted in the way that costs a great deal of money to look effortless and succeeds only at the first part. The sound of her arrived before she did, a voice cutting through the cabin hum like a key dragged along a car door, high and precise and carrying the assumption that whoever was speaking it was correct. "I don't understand why this is complicated," she was saying to the gate agent who had reboarded to assist her, a young man named Kevin who had the expression of someone counting down from a very large number. "I booked an aisle seat. This says 15B. 15B is a middle seat. A middle seat is not an aisle seat. Miss Hutchins, the confirmation email does show 15B. The confirmation email is wrong. Your system is wrong." She stepped fully into the cabin now, and the effect was of the room contracting slightly. Several passengers who had been in various states of relaxation sat up. "I fly United 4 times a month. I am a Premier Platinum member. I have had conversations with David Kish, in your VP's office about exactly this kind of situation. Would you like me to call him? Because I'm happy to call him right now." Kevin smiled a smile that was a coping mechanism and indicated the overhead bins. "If you'd like to take your seat, I can have someone." "My bag," she said. "This bin is full. Someone has put something enormous in this bin and now there is no room for my bag." She pointed at a bag in the overhead bin above row 14 that was, by any objective measure, a normal-sized carry-on. "Whose is that? Is that yours?" She looked at Gerald, who blinked. "You need to move that." "That's not, I think that's actually." "Move it." Trish appeared from the back galley with the particular walk of someone who had managed situations like this before and found them exhausting but manageable. "Hi there, I'm Trish. Can I help you find some space for your bag? You can tell me why a paying customer has to fight for basic accommodations on a 2-hour flight." Brenda Hutchins set her Rimowa on the armrest of 14A and looked down the aisle with the expression of someone assessing damage. Her gaze traveled slowly. It passed over Sarah the nurse. It passed over the sleeping man in the suit. It moved across Marcus Webb's burgundy hoodie and stopped. He knew that stop. He had spent 4 years learning the weight of it. "What?" she said, not a question, and then, louder, I'm sorry, is there a medical situation on this flight? Because no one told me there would be should this person be flying?" The cabin shifted. Gerald went very still. Sarah, in 12A, slowly removed her earbuds. Marcus did not look up from his folder. He kept his pen in his hand. He knew that looking up was the thing that cost you the most, and he had learned to spend carefully. "Sir," she said, and she said it with a kind of emphasis that was not directed at his name but at everything she saw that wasn't his name. "Sir, I'm sorry, but are you contagious?" Trish said, "Ma'am, I'm asking a legitimate medical question." Brenda Hutchins' voice had risen by exactly the amount required to ensure everyone within 6 rows could hear. "If there is a communicable condition on this aircraft, passengers have a right to know. I don't know what's on his face and I don't know what caused it, and I would like someone in a position of authority to tell me whether this is a health risk." Marcus put his pen down on his folder. The click of it against the paper was the quietest sound in the cabin. He looked up. "It's not contagious," he said. His voice was level. Not cold, level. 17 years old, and he had the voice of someone who had survived things that required a certain quality of voice. "I was in a fire." "A fire." She said it the way someone says a word in a foreign language they're not sure they're pronouncing correctly. "Yes." "Well." She turned to Trish. "I don't think I should have to sit in this row." 15B is in the next row, ma'am," Trish said carefully. "That still, I can see," she gestured at Marcus with the hand holding the Rimowa handle. "I just don't think it's appropriate. I have a sensitive stomach. Looking at that, for 2 hours is not something I should have to." "That," said Sarah from 12A, very clearly, "is a child." Brenda Hutchins turned. "I'm sorry?" You're pointing at a child and calling him that. I'm a nurse. I know exactly what that scarring is from, and I know exactly how many surgeries it takes, and I know that he can hear every word you're saying. I didn't say anything about him. I said I have a sensitive stomach, which is a medical condition. It is not a medical condition. I'm going to need to speak to the captain. What happened next took 4 seconds. Brenda Hutchins, in the process of turning back toward Trish, caught the handle of her Rimowa on the armrest of 14A and lurched. The carry-on tilted. She grabbed for it with both hands and in doing so knocked the lidded paper cup of coffee that the passenger in 14A, a man named Brent who had been sitting in absolute silence since boarding, who was 51 years old, who had, beneath his plain gray quarter zip, a retired Air Force colonel's worth of stillness had been holding on the fold-down tray. The cup hit the tray table. The lid did not hold. The coffee, not scalding, 40 minutes old, but hot enough, still hot enough, spread across the tray and ran, in a deliberate sheet, across the folder of 8 double-spaced pages and onto Marcus Webb's lap. Marcus made a sound. A short, cut-off intake of breath. His hands came up and off the folder. The hot coffee soaked through the hoodie's front pocket and into the fabric against his thighs, and he stood instinctively, the way anyone stands when something hot lands on them, and his head hit the overhead bin and he sat back down hard, and the folder with his testimony slid off the tray onto the floor, pages fanning. The cabin went silent. Not the kind of silence that is the absence of sound. The kind that is made of held breath. Oh, for Brenda Hutchins looked at the upended cup. That was his fault. She pointed at Brent. He had his tray out when the seatbelt sign was on. The seatbelt sign had not been on. Sarah was out of her seat. Gerald was pressing himself against the window. Trish had her hand on the call button. A woman in 18C, later identified in the incident report as Patricia, grandmother, traveling alone, stood straight up with her hands pressed to her mouth. Marcus sat very still. The hoodie was wet. The coffee was still warm against his skin, and the grafted skin on his left thigh, which had less sensation than normal skin but not none, never none, registered the warmth as a dull, white pressure rather than a sharp pain. He breathed once, twice. He looked at the pages on the floor. His left hand, the one with the reconstructed fingerprints, reached down and gathered them. He straightened them against his knee. He looked at the first line of his testimony. My name is Marcus Webb. I was 13 years old when the fire started. Brent, in 14A, had not moved. He had watched the coffee spill. He had watched Marcus get hit by the overhead bin. He had watched the pages scatter. And now he was watching Brenda Hutchins stand in the aisle telling Trish that she needed a new seat, a different row, that she did not feel safe, that her rights as a passenger were being violated. He was watching her the way men watch things they have decided about. He reached into the inside pocket of his gray quarter zip. He removed a credentials wallet. Black, worn at the corners, the kind of worn that means used not neglected. He opened it and held it where Trish could see it. Trish went very still. Then she looked at Darius. Then she pressed the call button with a kind of finality. The badge was U.S. Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. The name beneath the seal read Brent A. Calloway, Special Agent in Charge. Below that, in smaller text, Federal Law Enforcement. Gerald looked at it. Then he looked at the man he had spent 40 minutes telling about his daughter's soccer tournament, and the man he had been talking to was the same man, but the information changed the shape of him somehow. The woman in 18C sat back down very slowly. Brenda Hutchins was mid-sentence, something about customer service standards, when Darius said, from 3 feet away, in the voice of someone done choosing words carefully, "Ma'am. Stop talking. Right now." She stopped. The man who had been sitting in 16D since before anyone else boarded, quiet, a paperback open in his lap, a dark jacket that fit in a specific way, stood up. He showed his credentials without theatricality. A case held open at chest height, identification, and badge visible, the practiced calm of a man for whom this is procedure. Federal Air Marshal. U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Brenda Hutchins, he said. His name, his badge said, was Torres. I need you to remain where you are. She looked at Torres. She looked at Calloway's credentials, still held open. She looked at Darius, who had his hands clasped in front of him and was looking at her the way someone looks when they've made a decision they feel good about. She started. Don't, said Torres. Her face did what faces do when the ground shifts. First, confusion, the slack-jawed second when the brain is still loading. Then, processing, the eyes moving too quickly from face to face, adding it up and not liking the sum. Then, realization, the color leaving the cheeks and rushing back wrong. Then, the calculation, can I recover this, is there a version of this I survive, playing out in the tightening around her eyes and the slight forward lean, the beginning of a performance. Then, the understanding, landing like a door closing, that there was no version. That Torres had been watching since before she boarded. That Calloway had said nothing for an hour because he was deciding what was necessary. The moment she understood it was too late arrived in her face as a kind of stillness. Not calm. The stillness of something stopped. Captain Marsh's voice came over the PA measured, no dramatics, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a brief delay before pushback. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. The crew has everything under control. The aircraft was still at the gate. Torres said, in a low voice, to Brenda Hutchins, you're going to step off this aircraft. You're not going to speak. You understand? She nodded. A very small nod. Calloway leaned forward, across the now empty tray table, and looked at Marcus. Are you okay? Marcus had straightened his pages. The coffee stain on the testimony's first page had spread around the word fire in a pale brown halo. He looked at the badge. He looked at Calloway's face, the steady eyes, the particular quietness. I have testimony to give at 2 o'clock, Marcus said. You'll give it, Calloway said. He stood. He buttoned his quarter zip. He turned to Trish and said, quietly, I'll need to give a statement before we fly. And I'd like someone to get this kid a dry hoodie if there's one in Lost and Found. And a new copy of whatever those pages were. Trish nodded. Her eyes were bright. I can do that. One more thing. Calloway turned. He looked at Brenda Hutchins, standing in the aisle with Torres at her shoulder, and he spoke precisely and without elevation. In 13 years of federal law enforcement, I have sat next to thousands of people on hundreds of flights. I have never introduced myself unless I needed to. I needed to today. I want you to think about that. She opened her mouth. Torres touched her elbow. She closed it. The walk down the aisle was 14 rows. She passed Sarah, who said nothing but did not look away. She passed Patricia in 18C, who also said nothing. She passed the man in the gray suit, who had woken up at some point and now watched with the puzzled alertness of someone who missed the beginning of a movie and is catching up. At row 10, a boy of about 8 asked his mother, in a voice that carried, Is she in trouble? His mother said, very quietly, Yes, baby. She is. The aircraft door. The jet bridge. Gone. The cabin held its breath for one full second. Then Sarah started clapping. Not the way people clap at a performance, the way people clap when something true has happened and their bodies need to express it. Gerald joined. Then Patricia. Then it spread forward and back, not thunderous but genuine, the specific sound of people who had felt helpless feeling something shift. Marcus Webb did not clap. His hands were holding his pages. He looked out the oval window at the February sky, at the ground crew below, at the ice crystals still stippling the edges of the glass. After a moment he turned back and looked at the empty aisle, and the expression on the right side of his face, the unscarred side, the 16-year-old side, was something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction. Something quieter. Something that looked like the first breath after a long time underwater. Trish came back with a United Airlines branded sweatshirt, navy blue, guest services, one size too large, and laid it across the tray. She printed his pages from the gate agent's terminal. She brought them to him in a fresh folder. Okay, she asked. Yeah, Marcus said. He looked at the folder. Yeah. Flight 303 pushed back at 8:41 a.m., 23 minutes behind schedule. The sky over Kentucky had lightened by then, not to blue, not yet, but to the particular silver that means the sun is coming, that means the cloud cover has limits. Captain Marsh brought them up through it in a long, banking climb, and when they broke through the overcast at 11,000 feet, the light came in through the oval windows sudden and complete. Marcus read his testimony twice more. He crossed out 2 sentences and wrote better ones in the margins. Over the Appalachians, there was light chop, as promised, and he held the folder steady on his tray and did not look up. He did not sleep. He looked out the window at the country below, its winter fields and frozen rivers and the long gray threads of interstate, the world from the altitude where everything is simplified into what matters. He thought about what he would say at 2 p.m. He thought about the children at Shriners who would not be there to say it themselves. He thought about the fire, which he did not think about often by choice, and he let himself think about it for 60 seconds exactly. He had learned to measure it, and then he put it away. Federal charges were filed against Brenda Corinne Hutchins before Flight 303 landed at Reagan National. The criminal complaint, case number 2:26 CR0381, Southern District of Ohio, cited interference with a flight crew under 49 U.S.C. Section 46504, disorderly conduct aboard an aircraft, and civil rights harassment of a minor. The assault component of the coffee spill, whether intentional or negligent, was referred to the DOJ's Civil Rights Division at Callaway's request. United Airlines issued a public statement announcing her permanent ban from all United-operated flights. A spokeswoman for the airline confirmed that a review of incident response training was already underway. At 1:47 p.m., Marcus Webb walked into the hearing room of the Senate Commerce Committee on Capitol Hill, in a Navy United Airlines sweatshirt that was too large for him, carrying a folder of 8 pages with coffee-ringed margins and handwritten corrections. He sat at the witness table. He arranged his pages. He looked up at the senators. He began, "My name is Marcus Webb. I was 13 years old when the fire started. And somewhere over the Appalachians, on the return flight, a crew that had seen something true about a boy finished their route in the ordinary grace of ordinary work, the drink cart, the collected cups, the final announcement, the wheels meeting the ground. The February sky above Cincinnati was still silver. But the clouds had limits.